The C-SPAN Update, the weekly newspaper of America's network, helps viewers track special events that our cameras record. Whether it's a speech by the president, a former president, a presidential candidate, a foreign leader, or a cabinet member, the update helps you plan your C-SPAN viewing. The update also follows C-SPAN's election coverage, lets you know when the House is in session, and recaps our viewer call-in programs. You'll know in advance about important National Press Club speeches and learn more about the inner workings of C-SPAN. Call 1-800-321-5700, and for just $24, we'll send you 50 issues of the update, your guide to C-SPAN's special events coverage. If you order an update subscription now, you'll receive a free gift, Justice for All. This valuable guide to the Supreme Court is a useful primer for your C-SPAN viewing. Its explanation of legal terms serves as the perfect complement to C-SPAN's weekly coverage of the judicial system. Call 1-800-321-5700, and we'll send you 50 issues of the C-SPAN update and Justice for All for only $24. Call today. C-SPAN is the cable industry's public affairs network. Since 1979, C-SPAN has provided nationwide audiences an insider's look at the democratic process. If you have a comment about our network, please write to us. Our address is C-SPAN, 444 North Capitol Street, Northwest, Suite number 412, Washington, D.C., and the zip code is 20001.
Up next, we'll re-air our second Election 88 call-in program recorded Friday evening. Our programs are focusing on campaign advertising. Our next guest is Janet Mullens, Media Director and Deputy National Political Director to the Bush-Quayle campaign.
Janet Mullens, Media Director and Deputy National Political Director for Bush-Quayle 88. What is the overall strategy of the Bush-Quayle campaign TV paid media campaign?
I think we have three different objectives in the Bush-Quayle campaign. First of all, we want to introduce George Bush to the voters, let them know a little bit about the man, his values, his beliefs, where he wants to take the country, which was really the first phase of the media campaign. The second phase of the media campaign has been to talk about his record, his views on particular issues, and how they might differ from Michael Dukakis's views on a variety of issues. And then the last phase of the campaign, we hope to sum it up, to give people one more time another look at George Bush, and hopefully have given them enough reasons to cast their vote for him on Election Day.
Which phase are we in now, the second one or the third one?
We're sort of on the border. We're about ready to enter the final phase of the campaign. Of course, now in the last couple of weeks of the campaign, voters are paying even closer attention. A lot of voters have made up their mind, but there are millions of voters in the country who've not yet made up their minds, who've decided to focus very closely and listen even more intently to what the candidates have to say.
We called you the Media Director and Deputy National Political Director. What does that entail?
I think the latest I heard the description of my job is that I'm in charge of deploying the media, and I think that's a fairly good assessment of what I do. All of us who are involved in media, of course, are involved in the message and what are we going to say and how are we going to say it, but most particularly my job is, once we've decided on that message, how are we going to convey it, where are we going to go, how are we going to deploy our resources, and are we going to perhaps offer different messages to voters in different parts of the country, that kind of thing.
Let me tell our audience that our phone lines are open. We're going to spend as much time as we can with Janet Mullens hearing about the paid media campaign of the Bush campaign, also showing you a number of the spots that I suppose some are shown nationally and some of them regionally that are produced by the Bush-Quayle campaign, and we'll also get your calls in. But you can begin dialing now, and we'll go to the phones as soon as we get a little bit more on the table here. Let me ask you about the Dukakis spot that is called The Packaging of George Bush. Your reaction to it as a Bush media person?
Our reaction is probably the same as general public reaction to the spot. It is what we refer to as an insider's spot. It really doesn't deal with the issues. It doesn't deal with the election and the choice that the voters have to make. It's an attempt on the part of the Dukakis campaign, I assume, to suggest that George Bush is in the hands of political operatives who tell him what to think, what to say, and how to say it. It's not a credible spot, a believable spot, and it's a totally irrelevant spot as far as we're concerned and as far as the decisions we have to make this November.
As we go through this, I'm going to describe a little bit each of the spots, and then after they're shown, ask you to comment on them,
sure,
either as to effectiveness or whatever. Upcoming are 3 of them called The Future, The Mission, and The Experience. They look to be about half a minute each, and they were produced after the convention. We'll be back after we see these 3 spots.
I want a kinder and gentler nation.
It's the president who defines the character of America.
I'm a quiet man, but I hear the quiet people others don't. The ones who raise the family, pay the taxes, meet the mortgage. And I hear them, and I am moved.
The president, the heart, the soul, the conscience of the nation.
For 7.5 years, I've worked with a great president. I've seen what crosses that big desk. I've seen the unexpected crisis that arrives in a cable in a young aide's hand. And so I know that what it all comes down to this election is the man at the desk. And who should sit at that desk? My friends, I am that man. I'm a man who sees life in terms of missions, missions defined, and missions completed. I will not allow this country to be made weak again. I will keep America moving forward, always forward, for an endless, enduring dream and 1,000 points of light. This is my mission, and I will complete it.
Janet Mullens, you're smiling. Did you accomplish your purpose in these ads?
I think we did. I'm smiling because those are some of my favorite spots, and I'm also smiling because I think that the American people in the course of those 3 very brief commercials got a really good picture of the George Bush we wanted to present to the American people. As you said, these spots began to air after the convention, after George Bush had really assumed the mantle of the candidate, the Republican candidate for the presidency, and we think they give the American people a really good idea of the George Bush that we all know and the George Bush we think should be the next president.
Maybe you saw the front page of the Washington Post this morning, and I asked it of one of your counterparts on the other side to react, and the headline is large, and it's above the fold, and it says, "Campaign ads play fast and loose with the truth. Bush Dukakis TV commercials often make misleading or false statements about records."
Mm-hmm. I would, after having read the article, I don't recall any specific example of a false statement that was made in advertising. I think certainly it's fair to say that you emphasize in any ads the points that you want to emphasize, but in the case of the Bush campaign, we are very, very careful in terms of the facts in all of our advertising. They go through a lot of research, a lot of background, a lot of very specific detail work before we put anything on the air. We stand very firmly behind all of the facts that are presented in our advertising and believe that all of them are true.
Is one person doing all of the TV for the Bush-Quayle campaign?
No, there are several. We have, of course, our media guru, if you will, is Roger Ailes, who is our senior media advisor and who is in charge overall of the media effort in the campaign. It's his political judgment and his political advice that leads us in the direction of what we might put on the air and how we might do that. There are a variety of people who contribute to the process and a variety of creative teams that take part in the process of creating some of these commercials. It's a little more than one person can do.
All right, let's show 2 more spots. One about nuclear waste, and then the famous tank spot.
Great.
Each half a minute, and we'll be back after we see both of those.
On an August day in 1988, an historic event took place. It didn't happen on Main Street or in any American town.
but in Russia, where soldiers began destroying hundreds of nuclear missiles with the understanding that we'd destroy some of our own, the first disarmament treaty of its kind. And though most Americans were unaware of the significance of the moment, or realized it was George Bush who led the way, someday their grandchildren will.
Michael Dukakis has opposed virtually every defense system we developed. He opposed new aircraft carriers. He opposed anti-satellite weapons. He opposed 4 missile systems, including the Pershing II missile deployment. Dukakis opposed the stealth bomber and a ground emergency warning system against nuclear attack. He even criticized our rescue mission to Grenada and our strike on Libya. And now he wants to be our commander-in-chief. America can't afford that risk.
The effectiveness of the tank ad?
It's effective for 2 reasons. Number one, the visuals that you see on the screen are very memorable. Lucky for us, not so lucky for the Dukakis campaign. Of course, that particular news clip did get a lot of attention on the occasion of that particular tank ride. That gets the attention of the viewer, which is what we attempt to do. However, the information that's imparted in the course of that spot is what we're really getting at. Michael Dukakis' position on foreign policy and defense issues, we believe, is out of the mainstream and does not represent the views of the majority of Americans. So first we get people's attention with a memorable news clip, but even more importantly, we get to the really serious issue of Michael Dukakis' position on these issues.
Have you gotten a political reaction from the spot?
Yes, we've got an overwhelmingly favorable reaction from people. We've tested the advertising. We've talked to a lot of people about the advertising. The first reaction, of course, is to smile because the film clip is humorous. But after a pause and after thinking and really listening to the points that we make in the ad, the next reaction is that it's deadly serious and that there are serious reservations that everyone should have about these issues and Michael Dukakis' position on these issues.
All right, let's go to the phones with Janet Mullens of the Bush-Quayle campaign. Amherst, Massachusetts. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I have a question for Janet Mullens. I was wondering if she thought there was going to be any negative fallout for the Bush campaign from the prosecution of the Marcoses in New York City, because it looked to me as though that was a betrayal of the friendship between President Reagan and the Marcoses after years of maintaining our bases there. And it looks as though it might have been a deal in order to keep the bases there.
Caller, I'm sure she'll get to that, but do you have any question about any of the television aspects of this campaign?
Well, I made the call before the spots came on, but I stayed on the line anyway.
Oh, okay, sir. Thank you.
So if you could deal with my question, I'd appreciate it.
Sure.
I am certainly not here to discuss foreign policy. I would just suggest to you that if you're talking about any fallout in conjunction with our efforts and in terms of the campaign in the last couple of weeks of the campaign, I expect that it'll have absolutely no effect whatsoever.
Melbourne, Florida is next. Go ahead.
Hello.
You're on the air, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. I really enjoy your program. I have this that I'd like to say. My daughter is in New York, is a vice president of marketing and for television. And I think I understand something about how marketers take objects and make programs, put them out, you know, and sell the objects. I really do object to this packaging of people for the presidency of the United States. I wish that the packagers, the image makers, the poll takers would just all go back and take care of the objects that they have to sell, and the media give the candidates time to just come out and speak to the American people.
Okay, thank you. Are you a packager?
No, and I mean, I think there are a lot of people this year, especially on the other side, who would like to suggest that perhaps we are. We're talking about a small number of issues because, of course, in the course of 9 weeks on television, you can't address all the issues. But to suggest somehow that the media campaign drives the campaign is just totally false. In fact, the media campaign reflects the issues that are being discussed in the course of the campaign and the dialogue between the two candidates, but it's reactive, and it is driven by what the candidates want to say, the speeches that we give, the points we want to make in the course of the election, not the other way around.
Let's continue with some of these spots. This one, two of them, again a minute total, called Youngest Pilot and Gorbachev. There's some biographical information of the Vice President in these. We'll show them now and come back.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush.
The more you learn about how George Bush got this far, that he was once the youngest combat pilot in the Navy, that he started a business and met a payroll for years before representing us in Congress, the UN, and China, and the more you learn about his years as Vice President, the more you realize that perhaps no one in this century is better qualified to be President of the United States.
So help you God, so help me God.
In the next 4 years, somebody is going to have to continue the arms limitation talks with Gorbachev. Somebody is going to have to find out if Gorbachev is for real. Somebody is going to have to deal with him and look him in the eye and not blink. This is no time for uncertainty. No time to train somebody in how to meet with the Russians. This is the time for strength and experience. This is the time for somebody who is ready on day one to be a great president.
Janet Mullens, I guess all of these have run nationally?
Yes, they have.
I've got a note that you're the one in charge of media buying strategy. What does that mean?
There's a lot involved not only in deciding on the message, but when you might introduce that message to the American people, where you might introduce that message. It is sort of a game of resources in the presidential election. We both start out with the same amount of money, and how we choose to deliver our paid media message is a very important part of the overall strategy of the campaign, and I focus a lot of my time on that.
And what part of that strategy are you willing to share with us right now?
Not a whole lot. Obviously, each of us would like to know what the other intends to do, how we expect to spend our money, where we expect to spend our money, and what messages we intend to deliver when. So that's obviously not something that we usually choose to divulge to the other side in advance.
How far in advance can you plan a media buy? And I ask because there are always political developments you can't anticipate.
Sure. Well, it's two-pronged. It's a very reactive process in that we need to respond where the voters are, where we feel that people still need more information about our candidate and about the other candidates. So it's constantly changing process. However, the planning and the strategic planning for the process began early summer once the Vice President had secured the nomination.
Back to the phone, Scottsdale, Arizona. Go ahead.
I just wanted to express my thoughts about this campaign.
Tell you what, caller, would you like to express your thoughts about the television aspects of the campaign?
The whole thing.
Okay. I want you to know, though, that Janet Mullens is here because she's here to talk about the television ads produced by the Bush campaign.
Well, I think they're terrible.
Why?
I think they're kind of down in the sewer.
How?
They're not very truthful.
Such as?
The things that they talk about, Governor Dukakis doing things that he actually has changed, and things of that kind. They just keep on running the same things.
Even though you believe them to be wrong?
Absolutely.
Anything else?
No, I think that's enough.
Thank you.
I'd really like to respond to that on a couple of different levels. Number one, there's a lot of charges and countercharges about the truth or the accuracy of advertising and being, as the previous caller said, in the sewer. I think it's really important to note the differences that we see between the way our campaign has addressed the issues in advertising and the way the Dukakis campaign has addressed advertising. All of our advertising and all of the messages that we are conveying about Mike Dukakis are based on his record. They're based on his activities as governor, on the votes that he's cast in the legislature, and on the bills that he either supported or opposed as governor. So it's all based on his record and on his activity, as opposed to the Dukakis campaign that since July, since the Democratic National Convention, has lobbed one very personal attack after another at the Vice President, at the Vice President's family, his values, the way he lives, every personal aspect you can imagine related to George Bush. So to suggest that somehow our advertising is negative or dirty or quote unquote in the sewer, I take exception to that and in fact say that it is the other side that is behaving that way rather than the Bush campaign.
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, go ahead.
Yes, good evening. I have a twofold question. The first is on the advertisement. I've been viewing your advertisement as y'all been showing them, and earlier in the campaign I heard Bush speaking about reaching out for different Americans that normally was not in the Republican Party. And the only commercials I seem to see a black in were the ones he was showing prison ads, or William Horton would seem to enforce a whole lot of stereotypes to certain people. And the second part is, at the cost of commercials, I hear y'all constantly complaining about this. And one of the networks offered Bush and Dukakis a chance to come on with no news commentators to ask questions, where they can freely tell people in America exactly what they stood for and what they want to do. And I was wondering, why couldn't Bush accept that? Now, I'm a nonpartisan voter. I support neither Bush or Dukakis at this moment. I'm waiting on one of these men to give me a reason to vote for him.
All right, sir. Thank you. Minorities in the ads.
First of all, the first series of ads that you saw were ads about George Bush and his family, and of course there weren't any blacks in those particular ads. If you watched closely in the ad about eliminating nuclear weapons, in fact there were minorities in that ad. We have never done an ad that uses Willie Horton's face in the course of this campaign, and certainly we believe are reaching out to all minority voters in the course of this campaign. I also believe that we've given, through our paid advertising, through the speeches that the Vice President gives on a daily basis, have given the American voters many, many reasons to vote for George Bush. The last commercials you just saw talked about his experience, his ability to deal with foreign leaders, which is probably the most important activity that the President of the United States is involved in.
He also asked about free time offered by the networks, and would the Vice President accept such an offer?
The Vice President has been on many talk shows and many interview shows, and of course we've been through the course of 2 debates. Mike Dukakis has chosen in the closing days of the campaign to spend a lot of time on live television because after 9 weeks of heavy campaigning, he's decided that maybe the American people don't know who he is. George Bush is traveling this country 7 days a week. He is in 5, 6, 7 states in the course of a 2 or 3 day swing. We think the American people are seeing George Bush. He is talking to the voters. And to suggest that because we don't accept the invitation of a broadcast journalist to do a particular television show is any indication that George Bush is reluctant to talk to the voters is just a groundless complaint.
I was going to ask you later, but I will now because the caller prompts it. There's an item in today's New York Times that says, new TV spots assail Dukakis on furloughs. And the basis of the story is that there's an organization called the Committee for the Presidency, which is televising an ad, or will start on Friday in California, featuring the victims of the prisoner Willie Horton, who has become an issue in this campaign. Who is the Committee for the Presidency, and is it associated with the Bush-Quayle campaign?
I can't tell you who they are. They are not associated with the Bush campaign. There are many independent expenditure groups on both sides doing advertising on their own initiative, both for Mike Dukakis and for George Bush. This is an independent expenditure group. They are not sanctioned by us or associated with the Bush campaign in any way, shape, or form, nor did we have anything to do with the advertising that they currently have on the air.
All right. Charlotte, North Carolina, go ahead, please.
Hello.
Hi, you're on the air.
Thank you. My question came just up from the last interview when she said that they hadn't put out anything with Willie Horton's face on it. I'm down here in North Carolina. I've been seeing that probably all this month. And I think the answer that she gave was about the answer that Bush always gives on anything that's touchy, is I don't know and I can't tell you. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with the advertising campaign that the Bush administration has been putting through.
Well, caller, don't go away. Janet Mullens,
well,
stay on the line.
I don't know what I answered. I don't know, or I don't recall to. I can tell you without any doubt or any equivocation that there is no television commercial in existence in the Bush campaign that uses Willie Horton's face. It does not exist. There are commercials that are being produced by other groups Just as we discussed a few minutes ago, there are independent expenditure groups. In fact, some of the victims of the crime, including the Barnes family from right here in Maryland, have been on many shows. The Reader's Digest has done a show about Willie Horton. There have been shows on cable about Willie Horton and the tragic incident that happened in Maryland that has nothing to do with our paid advertising. I will say there's been a lot of publicity about Willie Horton because it's a tragic case, and we think a case that demonstrates a serious mistake by the governor of Mike Dukakis in terms of his policies on crime as he's been governor. But they are not paid Bush advertising. They simply don't exist.
Caller, follow up?
Well, I'll say like this. I've always been part of the silent majority. And until this administration took over 8 years ago and began their stuff, I've watched them take it where the now editorial rebuts about comments can't be put on the air unless you pay for them. So they've taken away that right of the poor people and the working people to try to have any say-so. They've completely dominated all types of media, whether it's the newspaper, the television, the radio, and they're completely shutting off all the American people. Now, I'm not voting for Michael Dukakis because I like him, but I'm voting for him against the Republicans. Y'all are the worst regime that I've ever seen.
Okay,
I've been born, and I grew up from the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. I've been through the 18-year-old vote, and I've seen how you've manipulated all us all these years.
All right, Charlotte, North Carolina. Thank you.
It sounds like we might be from the same age group. The only comment I would make is that I'm from Kentucky, and I would wish that at some point in time Kentucky newspapers could be even pretend to be controlled by any kind of Republican ideology. I come from a state where the media is heavily Democratic in its influence. So I just, beyond that, I'm not sure I have any comment.
You're a Kentucky colonel?
No, I'm not. They haven't given me that on
Oh,
yet.
okay. The next two spots, I have a note here, and they're characterized as Dukakis negative ads. You may challenge that, but we'll certainly get your reaction. They're called Revolving Door and The Quiz, and we'll be back in a minute.
As governor, Michael Dukakis vetoed mandatory sentences for drug dealers. He vetoed the death penalty. His revolving door prison policy gave weekend furloughs to first-degree murderers not eligible for parole. While out, many committed other crimes like kidnapping and rape, and many are still at large. Now Michael Dukakis says he wants to do for America what he's done for Massachusetts. America can't afford that risk.
A crime quiz. Which candidate for president gave weekend passes to first-degree murderers who were not even eligible for parole? Michael Dukakis. Who vetoed mandatory jail sentences for drug dealers? Michael Dukakis. Who opposes capital punishment in all cases and even vetoed the death penalty for cop killers? Michael Dukakis. Which candidate for president can you really count on to be tough on crime? George Bush. Experienced leadership for America's future.
Are those negative ads?
They are certainly comparative ads, and if I were Dukakis, I would consider them negative ads because I certainly would not want to emphasize that particular aspect of my record as governor.
We've got a quarter hour left to go with Janet Mullens of the Bush-Quayle campaign. The subject is television and politics, paid advertising, as opposed to free media, and we'll get to that terminology in a second. Lodi, California is next. Go ahead, please.
Yes, hello?
Hi, you're on the air.
Yes, I was watching both of the ads this afternoon, the gentleman and the lady now. And I think that Bush has good ads. I mean, they're truthful and they are good ads. And there's one, I think, about the man. I don't know if it's true or if it isn't true, but they said about Social Security, he had cut Social Security, but I think if you look back, that's the year from January, they froze it from January to July. And Governor Dukakis voted that way also. So they should check that out because I think that's wrong advertising.
All right, ma'am. Anything else?
No, that's all.
Okay, thank you.
I was not able to see the earlier part of the show, so I can't particularly comment. The Social Security ad is a good example of what the other side is doing, and as you pointed out earlier when we were talking, you can argue the factual accuracy of our ads, but certainly we could argue, and I think argue successfully, the factual accuracy of the ads that our opponent is putting out about George Bush.
Which is more effective, free media or paid media, and what's the difference?
The difference is that what you see on the screen, what you've seen tonight, is of course paid media, 30-second, 60-second commercials that we construct to give people a picture of George Bush and a picture of our opponent. Free media is the term that has been coined to talk about the coverage that we get on the nightly news or get on the Sunday talk shows. What's more effective, more important? Both are equally important, hopefully, and if you're doing things right in your campaign, one will complement the other.
New York City, go ahead, please.
Yes, even though the official Bush chapter does not, in fact, sanction the hidden agenda that is obvious on the Willie Horton name, I'd like your comment on the aspect of the fact that it is used throughout the United States to do quite a bit of traveling, and whether or not you feel there is a hidden agenda and some innuendo that is perhaps targeted or maybe unofficially sanctioned by the Bush chapter, because it's painfully obvious, and I'm not a black person myself, and when I go out, I squirm a little bit when I'm in the seat when I hear these ads, and I'd just like you to comment on it.
The first comment I would make is that there's no hidden agenda at all. Our agenda is very public and very open. The furlough program in Massachusetts was a disgrace. The furlough program was ended at long last in Massachusetts because over 53,000 people put their names on petitions to force it on a ballot initiative in Massachusetts so that Michael Dukakis would have to change the furlough program. The furlough program was started in a previous administration. It was continued by Governor Dukakis. He was asked by the people of his state to discontinue the program. He is the only governor of the only state where first-degree murderers who were not eligible for parole were let out on weekend passes. The result was the tragedy that is commonly now referred to as the Willie Horton case. That was not an issue that George Bush or the Bush campaign began, initiated, or thought of. It was a disgrace in Massachusetts for over 2 years. The people who are going around the country now, in particular the Barnes family and Donna Cuomo, who is the sister of the person who was victimized by Willie Horton, did that on their own initiative. They started a group in Massachusetts called the Citizens Against Unsafe Society in order to turn around the furlough program and to bring pressure on the governor. We didn't invent the issue. We think it says a lot about Michael Dukakis and his positions on crime and his judgment, but the issue is out there. The people who have fought and opposed the program and who go around the country on a daily basis are talking against it because they've been victimized, because they've been hurt by the program, because they don't want to see a man who might continue this type of program be elected the next president of the United States. There's no hidden agenda. It's a very direct agenda. We think it's wrong. We think it speaks to Governor Dukakis' judgment. We think it speaks to his positions on issues related to crime.
In order to be fair to both sides, we do want to squeeze in an equal number of spots, so we're going to go straight to a 30-second spot produced by the Bush campaign about Boston Harbor.
As a candidate, Michael Dukakis called Boston Harbor an open sewer. As governor, he had the opportunity to do something about it, but chose not to. The Environmental Protection Agency called his lack of action the most expensive public policy mistake in the history of New England. Now, Boston Harbor, the dirtiest harbor in America, will cost residents $6 billion to clean. And Michael Dukakis promises to do for America what he's done for Massachusetts.
How do you decide how often a spot runs?
A spot has to stay on the air for a certain amount of time in order for it to get through. There's a lot of advertising on the air. It's not all political advertising. There are all sorts of complicated formulas, but basically you have to have a very simple message and a very direct message in terms of your paid advertising, and there's a lot of repetition involved to make sure that people hear it and understand it and really listen to what it is that we have to say.
What's the best time of day to reach a particular audience?
It really varies on the voters that you're trying to target. Rather than targeting people at a particular time of day, we tend to target people either nationally or we target people in particular states that are important to us in order to reach the magic number 270 electoral votes. So the strategy is more targeting in terms of states rather than it is in terms of particular times of the day.
Of all the spots we've seen, have any of them not run nationally?
No, all of the spots that you've seen have been seen by people all across the country.
And let's take another call. Medson, Illinois, go ahead, please.
Yes, it's Matson.
Matson, okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Good evening. I was wondering, why you haven't advertised about the halfway house that Bush sponsored in Texas when one of the boys, I think, killed and raped the minister's wife, and bring out the lies that Bush is telling, the mudslinging. I mean, it's really severe. And how can he be an example to the next generation? Thank you.
The caller was referring to an example, a reach, as I would refer to it, that the Dukakis campaign is trying to make to suggest that there's some sort of a parallel in George Bush's record to match the atrocity of the furlough program in Massachusetts. Yesterday they tried another attempt to find a federal prisoner who may have been released that would use a comparable kind of example, that perhaps George Bush has been responsible for a Willie Horton kind of activity. The fact of the matter is that it doesn't exist. The Dukakis campaign is quite worried about the subject of furloughs, and as I would be too if I had to defend the record on that particular program. We haven't talked about it because there's no there. That's not an issue for us, and it's really not a particularly accurate assessment of what happened in Texas either.
Coming up, another minute's worth of 2 Bush spots, both of them called promises.
How good a governor is Michael Dukakis?
I don't think that Mike Dukakis has lived up to his promises.
He's raised taxes, and he's raised taxes.
He's taken money from the retirement funds that the people have put in there, and, to balance his mistakes that he's made.
Michael Dukakis should be called Michael Taxkakis.
Dukakis has made one mess out of Massachusetts.
I'm a Democrat, and I've never voted Republican before, but this time I'm voting for George Bush.
Michael Dukakis promised not to raise taxes, but as governor, he imposed the largest tax increase in Massachusetts history. He promised jobs, but since 1984, Massachusetts lost 90,000 blue-collar jobs. He promised less spending, but spent at a greater rate per capita than any other governor in America. And now he wants to do for America what he's done for Massachusetts. America can't afford that risk.
Janet Mullens, do you ever use professional actors in these spots?
Yes, as a matter of fact, the last spot you saw was a professional actor. It was a characterization of Michael Dukakis' record on economic issue, on employment and growth in his state. So occasionally we do. The first spot you saw was what we call a man in the street spot that was filmed in Massachusetts. Those are real people. They literally, if you heard the background noise, were people we approached on the street. Obviously, we talked to a lot of people on the street, but these were people who had something to say about a Michael Dukakis they've seen as governor of Massachusetts now for the 3rd term.
Do these people come to you, or is it difficult finding these people to make those kinds of on-air testimonials?
Having been in Massachusetts for one of the shoots, it was not difficult at all. I would say that it was disconcertingly easy to find people who had criticisms of Mike Dukakis' record in Massachusetts. It may have something to do with the fact that one of the days we filmed, the newspaper screamed out about the latest tax increase that Michael Dukakis signed in his state. So no, we've had no problem finding people who are willing to critique his performance as governor.
If we act quickly, we're going to succeed in getting all of the spots in. This last one is a minute long, called Family.
Thousands of people see him, and I always loved the time someone said to George, how can you run for president? You don't have any constituency. And George said, well, I've got a great big family and thousands of friends, and that's what he has.
For more than 40 years, George Bush has met every challenge his country and the world have offered up to him. The truth is, the more you learn about George Bush, the more you realize that perhaps no one in this century is better prepared to be President of the United States.
Are all the ads that we're going to see already in the can and produced?
Oh, I think that gets into some strategic decision making that we don't talk a lot about. we have 2 weeks to go in the course of the campaign, and there are lots of issues left that we could choose to talk about.
A slightly different question. Are there some ads in the can that we're going to see later?
Oh, sure. I mean, we still have 2.5 weeks to go. We talked earlier about the different stages of the paid advertising campaign. We're sort of in between the second stage and the final stage of the campaign. We still have more to say about George Bush and his record and why we think that people should vote for George Bush. So you'll certainly see more and new messages in the future.
Of all the ads we've seen, now that we've seen them all, have any of them run regionally, or are they all national?
Both. I mean, we run network advertising, which reaches the entire country, but then we extend that advertising and advertise more heavily in the states. So the advertising has really been seen both at the regional and at the national level.
Are there ads that we didn't see tonight that have been produced only for a certain area, and what would be an example of one?
There have been. For instance, we have an ad that deals with the subject of ocean dumping that will run in New Jersey because it's particularly appropriate there since the governor proposed to dump Massachusetts garbage off the New Jersey shore. It's possible that we will see environmental spots that will air particularly in Washington and in California that deal with particular environmental concerns, offshore oil drilling, that kind of thing. So yes, that's certainly possible in the future.
What's the budget in the Bush-Quayle campaign for television?
As much as we need to spend to get our message through. We don't talk about dollars or how we're actually going to allocate our resources, but it certainly is fair to say that a great percentage of our resources are devoted to television advertising.
All right. Janet Mullens, Media Director and Deputy National Political Director for Bush-Quayle 88. Thanks for spending this time with us today.
Thank you.
And thank you to our audience. Thank you for calling. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.
Our Election 88 call-in programs air live every Friday evening at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 3:30 Pacific. Stay with us here on C-SPAN for a speech by Massachusetts Senator Edward Kennedy. That's coming up after a short break.